Well, good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are.
Or g'day.
Well, g'day.
G'day, eh?
So I'll just say, you might recognize David here, David Aiken from Checkerhead Brewery. For those who haven't seen this before, we actually caught up with David back in, I think it was late October, early November, somewhere around
Was it
there.
that long ago? Wow.
So we caught up with him there. He's a juggler and a comedian who's decided to become a brewer. So if you want the whole backstory, go back and catch that video. But what he is doing is he's setting up this, I don't know, I hesitate to use lifestyle because it's often used pejoratively, but I think that's legitimate enough, a lifestyle type of brewery.
Sure.
Yeah. And so he's in the process of doing that. When we last spoke to you were planning to open on the 1st of April. And you had homework. The day we spoke to you, you were getting your floor installed. And where did it go after that? Have you got it installed? Are you still on target? What have you?
Okay, so the floor went in. Well, I can't remember at the time whether we were getting the concrete poured or whether we were having the surface done. Anyway, both of those things have been completed. And then we put down ram board on top of the floor to protect it while we were moving stuff around on it. And then the next phase of work was to do the framing and the walls and then get the walls done. And in the process, I was just away for this. We were talking just before we came to air about this trip I did around Christmas time, going back to do my job as a comedy juggler on cruise ships. And while I was away, there was a lot of work done on the wall prep, which wasn't exactly what I wanted. So I came back from that trip and some of the work had to be undone so that we could redo it. And what we're currently waiting on is FRP panels, which is fiberglass reinforced plastic, which is a watertight membrane that goes on in sort of in North American measurements. It's done by feet. So it's 4 by 10 foot panels that get put on the wall. And it provides a liquid barrier for your walls so you can wash them down really easily. And like in a brewery where you're dealing with lots of liquid, having a washable surface is pretty important. So I wanted those. I hadn't specified it clearly enough to the general contractor. The walls went ahead and get painted, which didn't really need to be done because these panels are going to be the equivalent of a painted surface anyway. So that all got sorted out. We then found the installer for the FRP panels, and they showed up about 3 weeks ago with the wrong panels because there are two different finishes to them, either a gloss finish or a pebbled finish. And the pebbled finish is preferable for a couple of reasons. One, it's less expensive. And two, if you get bumps or dings or anything on it, it doesn't show the wear and tear as much as a shiny, glossy surface would or does. So in a brewery, you're going to be bumping things around. So I wanted to have the pebbled surface. It is now on track to be installed sometime around the middle of March, but it was just supply issues as well because the pebbled ones were harder. They weren't in stock, so the installer had to wait to get them. And so everything was just put back a little bit. So we're not officially going to be opening on April 1st anymore. Is what it amounts to because of unexpected delays and because just things beyond my control. But we are going to have a sort of an open house launch event on April 1st so that we can say that my clown-inspired brewery opened on April Fool's Day. Right. Even though technically we aren't going to be able to sell beer. It'll be come on over, see how the process is coming, take a look at the space. And I'll have beer. And if you want to contribute, like if you want to leave a donation, you're more than welcome to, but I can't charge you for it because it's, again, the legalities of dealing with the provincial government, the federal government and local governments. You don't want to, get into trouble before you even open. So I'm trying to play it, correctly. So I want to invite people over and have a beer, but I'm not going to be able to officially be on track for putting in my Square account and typing in my numbers and getting actual money coming back in.
That's really be delayed a little bit longer.
A little bit longer, yeah, but we'll get there. And it's like everything, it's all part of the adventure as far as I'm concerned. So funnily enough, like the other juggling stuff is actually, there's a bunch of people wanting me to go out and do stuff, and I'm actually flying out next Wednesday to do a contract aboard the Diamond Princess, which was the ship that was initially in quarantine at the beginning of COVID when it was in Yokohama. and it's the first cruise for that ship back in Japan since the pandemic. So I'm going back to help launch that, which is great. I mean, I've spent a ton of time on that ship anyway, so it's like going home on a lot of levels, and I can do my show in either English or Japanese. So it's having the ability in both languages is really great. And then maybe while I'm over there, at least acquire some fantastic Japanese beer, but we'll see what actually happens. So it's like, if I get to travel around the world and enjoy breweries and things while I'm traveling and doing this other thing that I also really love, it goes back to you saying it's a lifestyle choice. It's like, I want to have a lifestyle business. I want the beer to be that way. I want my juggling career to be that way. I want to fill days with things I like doing and have people who are, excited about what's happening come and visit the brewery when it's eventually open. And then when I'm doing shows, have that a great exchange with an audience. I mean, I see so many similarities between the two in terms of giving people a great experience with the property that we're on, the little tiny brewery that we have, tasting things you might never have tried in a beer before. We have a red currant beer, and the red currants come straight from the garden, and like growing the hops here as well. So a lot of people have never seen a hop plant growing. Like, they love beer, but they've never really sort of figured out what the ingredients look like before they actually become the liquid. So it's really fun to be able to go, yeah, those plants grow, 7 meters every year from 0 up 7 meters. It's like, it's insane watching them grow. And if you come in June, you'll see them at this height. And if you come back in September, they'll be like ready to harvest, it's all really fun to have the different elements of beer going into the process of the property that we're on, and people can come and visit and see for themselves what goes into each glass. So it's fun.
Yeah, I think we discussed that before, or the last time, that for the showmanship side of it, like it is an experience. It's not just drinking something anonymous. It's all about the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, one of the other things that happened recently, I'm gonna go grab it actually because it's so fun. I'll be right back. Give me 1 sec.
Okay. So anyone joining, it's David's just running off there. So you're left with me. But he will be back in a second. So if you have any questions on the process of a brewery or anything, or or of juggling, I suppose, then or of fancy things like this, then please ask in the comments.
Yeah, by all means ask. So this is a tasting flight board, but it's also shaped like a juggling club. And I was having a conversation with a friend who happens to work at a lumber supply shop. We were at a brewery just before Christmas, and I said, I would love to have tasting flight boards that look like juggling clubs. And he goes, I can do that for you. And then, a few weeks later, he shows up and he shows me these, and they're just perfect. I mean, they perfectly fit the little taster glasses that we have for the brewery when we open. And at the bottom, they've got the logo sticker at the bottom of, angle it where you can see. Yeah. And then, what's going to eventually happen, so which each of the beer is, there's going to be magnets just in front of each of the beers, and you'll be able to put a bottle cap that has the actual name of the beer on it, so you can then be drinking and knowing what you're drinking at the same time, which is super fun. So it's these are silly things that don't really, I mean, it's not really important for the making of the beer, but going back to the experience again, it's like being able to go, you show up, I pull 3 of these off of the wall, I start juggling for you before you even ask me what you want to put in your flight. It just gives you a different experience right from the get-go, which I'm super excited about. But again, it's not your traditional brewery experience. It's like, and the guy's a juggler. And that's got a different level of connection. I mean, I guess you could go to like a fancy cocktail bar and have the flair bartending as part of that experience as well. But you never see that in a brewery. I mean, you don't see that kind of interaction so much, or at least I've never seen it at a brewery. So I'm really looking forward to trying to infuse that energy into the space as well.
Well, that's what I was talking to someone just recently, and they were asking about, brewery tours and all that. And that was my point. Like the mechanics of the brewery are pretty much like they're the same wherever you go. It's the exact same. It's the story behind it is why you want to go, and the people behind it. And, that's why you go visit a brewery. You can get their beer somewhere else, so you go for that reason.
But, well, you won't be able to get my beer anywhere else. I'm not going to be distributing it. I want it straight from here. And I mean, it was great actually. This when was it? When did we do this? On Sunday. Yeah, Sunday in the morning, I asked a whole bunch of friends to come over, and we physically moved the equipment out of one side of where it had been stored since May 15th last year when it arrived into the actual brew space. We still don't have the panels on the wall, but we wanted to do sort of a test fit to make sure to see the equipment laid out in the space so you knew what to expect. And so that tomorrow we've got a meeting with the plumber and the electrician so that they can look at the space and see how everything's laid out. So for glycol lines and for water lines and for electrical, they know the rough, like pretty much like within, I want to say like within 10 centimeters of where it's going to final location is going to be, but it's like right sort of set up and it looks great. It's fun to actually see the equipment finally in the space and starting to sort of go, oh, okay, yeah, I can now start to visualize the flow within the brewery itself and how everything is going to be moving. And okay, yeah, if we can squeeze this in, if we can tighten up this space a little bit, that'd be great. And how much room do we really need behind the tanks? Because if you're never going to get behind the tanks, except to maybe mop them down, as long as you can get a mop behind it, you don't necessarily need to physically be able to get behind the tank itself, which will allow for a bit more space by squeezing things together a little bit. So, the original plan that came from the manufacturer suggested 30 centimeters between tanks, but you can squeeze that down to like 5 or 4 centimeters between fermenting tanks. It's not going to have a difference as long as, again, you can get a hand or like something in it to wipe it down. You should be fine. So,
how much of that do you think is important? I mean, in terms of just the mechanics of setting up the brewery, how much do you need to try stuff out, pull it back out, examine it, and move things around? Or,
well, I mean, you can always, like, there's certain parts of it, like the boil tank and the kettle and the mash tun and the hot liquor tank. That stuff's pretty much going to be staying where it is, like from the time it's hooked up because of the electricals and everything else that's involved. You don't want to be moving that around so much.
Right.
The fermenters, you can adjust because they can move around. And with 2 guys, you can shuffle them around. I mean, they're not so big that they're like ridiculously heavy to move because I'm dealing with a 300-liter system. I'm dealing with a very, very small brewing operation. And that was by design. I don't want it to be bigger than that. I don't want to have so much, like the saying goes, it's like, it's one thing to make beer, it's another thing to sell it. And I don't want to have to worry about selling the beer. I just want to make interesting batches of beer, be able to sell out and not have to worry about it. And I think a lot of people, I mean, I did this beer course that just wrapped up recently, and one of the other guys in the course was working at a commercial brewery where they have like a 2,000-liter system, which is great if you're packaging and you're distributing and you're doing everything else like that. But he kept asking me, he's like, why do you want to work with such a small system? It doesn't sound like it's going to, be very profitable. And the big thing that comes out is like, if you're doing a lot of packaging, the packaging costs a lot of money. And then if you're hiring a lot of staff, if you've got a 20 hex system, 2,000-liter system, and you need to package and you need to then store that beer, and then you need to be able to distribute that beer, every time you add another layer of complication to the operation, you're adding a lot of cost in terms of staffing and vehicles and everything else that goes along with it. And if you can actually reverse it and get it down as small as possible, then you don't need to make as much money to pay for everything because you're not paying for as many things. So again, small by design. Test fitting, going back to your original question, it's like, yeah, it is important to sort of get a sense of where things need to be and how much you can adjust. But I have a feeling that once it's in place, it's never going to move. It'll be like once we start brewing with the equipment, once it's been cleaned and ready to go, I'm not going to be moving it around very much. There may be, small adjustments based on, 3 months into the system, I'm going, yeah, I really wish this was angled differently or, change a position slightly, but I don't think it's going to shift very much because there's just not enough room in the space. Like it's sort of, I'm dictated by the space I have to work in, and there's not a lot of wiggle room in there. So the tanks will go in, they'll stay where they are. And then it's just a question of, if I ever wanted to put more tanks in, then it starts to go, okay, then how would you do it? But I can't see that happening. I'm pretty happy with the setup that I've going for and what I think the potential for it will be. So
so that's back to your kind of your mention of like how much, I think you said this the last time, exactly how much you want to produce, and everything's built around like you need to produce this much, and you're not planning you're not building in extra capacity that you're not going to use. You know what you want, and that's it.
Yeah, and another brewery, they sat down and we had a great conversation, and they said, you always have to have sort of an exit strategy. So, you love doing it now, but 20 years from now, when I'm, in my mid 70s and I don't want to be lifting 25 kilo bags of grain around anymore. I mean, maybe I do. Maybe that'll keep me fit into my 70s, which would be great. And it is a passion project. So, I mean, I'm not doing it because it feels like a job. I'm doing it because I'm actually passionate about making the beer, which is critical. I think... Yeah, I think having a 300 liter system, if I decide to sell, it's the sort of pilot size for a lot of other breweries. So if you wanted a pilot system for somebody who has, a 20 hex system, this 300 liter system is a great little test batch system. So you can do, 300 liters is 6 50-liter kegs and you're done, right? So, I mean, that's really a test batch for just about any other breweries. Like you keg off 6 normal size kegs and you have them in the tasting room, and in a week or two those are gone in a regular brewery. But in this operation, that's good if I get rid of all that beer, because that's all I'm going to be making. So the trick is going to be just to I don't know, again, like people are saying, talking with the insurance people about, okay, what are your annual sales going to be? And it's like, I don't know. It's like, well, we need to sort of base our quote on your projected numbers. So it's like, well, here's a number, but like, I don't know if I'm going to hit it or not. And I don't know, whether that, that optimism is going to carry through in the project. I hope it does. I mean, I feel fairly confident that, people are coming out and enjoying, just sort of even at this level, coming out and having an experience and wanting to tell their friends about it. And the whole joke at the beginning of every tasting when somebody comes up, because we're not officially open, is, all right, I have to ask you 3 important questions. Question number 1, are you a liquor inspector for the province of British Columbia? Because clearly I'm not open, and of course I wouldn't do anything wrong. Oh, you're not? Oh, well, then would you like to become a beta taster for Checkerhead Brewing? Oh, a beta taster? Great, that sounds great. Sure. And then what is the first rule of Fight Club? We don't talk about Fight Club, and we don't talk about Checkerhead Brewing. So people come, they have a great experience, and they go, can we put it on social media? Can we talk about this? Can we tell our friends? And like, if they're members of the Fight Club, we can maybe talk. But I mean, I'm trying to keep it as low key as possible and sort of have this ground roots following grow at a very organic rate, and not, I'm not publicizing the opening. I sent out a newsletter to people saying that there's going to be a 2-hour open house on April 1st. But that went out to 100 people. I'm not talking like, publishing it in newspapers, sending it out like crazy. I'm just sort of slowly getting the word out. And I'm transitioning between the career as a juggler into the career as a brewer as organically as I possibly can as well. Like, I still enjoy the performing. It's just, wasn't always crazy about as much traveling as I was doing. So being able to have that performing experience as part of the brewery across the driveway from where I'm living means I don't have to travel as far, which is great. And again, going back to your point, it's a lifestyle choice. I'm not doing it because I'm trying to compete with any of the major producers. I'm doing it because I love doing it, and I want to give people a great experience, and an experience where they get to be involved if they want to be. So, I would love to have people come out and, sign a waiver if you want to be part of a brew day. So if you've never experienced, a commercial brewing operation, mine's sort of like the kindergarten. This is where you start. This is baby steps. And then, if you're a home brewer and you want to brew on a bigger system, it's like, come out, like, we'll do a collaboration together. And I have nothing but respect for interesting beers that are made by home brewers, because they're often more passionate and they're doing it for a different reason than a pro brewer is doing it anyway. So I think I have more akin to that side of the beer industry than like the commercial operations that are trying to, dominate the world with another macro lager. It's like, it's not my thing. I want to.
And are you getting a lot of people kind of wandering in by accident or deliberately coming out to you already? Or?
Well, we did for a long time until my wife, like okay, I'm going to take a couple steps back. So a friend of ours right in the middle of COVID said, you never know when you're going to go back for performing. You may as well start doing this beer thing. So let me help you. I came from the corporate world. I'm going to help you with your business end of stuff. So I'm going to help you get your incorporation paperwork done. And as soon as we got our incorporation paperwork done, I was like, wow, well, I'm official. I guess I can put myself on Google Maps. and as soon as you put yourself on Google Maps, people go brewery and they start showing up because they see it and they just are curious and they show up onto your driveway going, is this a brewery? And you kind of go, well, eventually it will be, but we're not there yet. And then your wife says, maybe you should put a sign out front that says we're not open yet, because people are just randomly driving up the driveway all the time. And so, yeah, we had a lot of people until before the sign was there, would just drive up. Then there's people who reach out via either social media, Instagram or Facebook, or through my website. There's a link you can email me directly, and people are asking, are you open? What are your hours? Are you open today? Can we come check stuff out? And my typical response is, we're not officially open yet, but we are doing pre-opening tours for people who are interested in seeing what's happening. And they'll definitely be here. But again, I can't charge you for it. But if you want to leave a contribution, like a donation to your server, if you want to provide a gratuity for your server, that's great. But I can't charge for beer because that's illegal, and I wouldn't want to do anything illegal. That would be bad. I'm just trying to get the word out on a case-by-case basis. And as people show up, it's great experience for me, also finding out what people like, with a lot of the beers that have been developed. It's like, okay, which ones of these are the ones that are going to be really popular? What are going to need to be the core beers? What do I want to keep experimenting with? And so it's all, I feel like I've got the best of both worlds in terms of I get to have all the fun and passion that a home brewer does, but on a slightly larger scale, like 10 times the basic homebrew scale is what I'm shooting for. So I can do 30 liters on my homebrew system. Now I'm going to be able to do 300 on my full production, but that's so small. It's so small in the world of beer that it's like barely scratching the surface. And I there's where we are on Vancouver Island, there are a few campgrounds, and there's some stuff that are the West Coast Trail, which is a really popular hiking destination in the summer. And the Juan de Fuca Trail is another one that's a shorter trail. But this area is starting to become more and more popular. There's a really good surf beach just up the island as well. And so we're a hop, skip, and a jump from a lot of stuff that people are going to be going to and seeing anyway. So I don't know how much we're going to sell. I don't know how successful this is going to be. People have said, what if you're really successful? What are you going to do then? And it's like, well, if you're really successful and people really want to come and get your beer, well, then you put a cap on it so you don't sell out. So you can, have a sustainable volume that you can continue to produce. And if it ever gets to the point where it stops being fun, then I'm going to question whether I want to keep doing it. So, if let's just say it's 100 liters of beer a day that I'm going to try to sell, or 200 or whatever the number is, doesn't really matter. So if it's 100 liters of beer and I sell out by 2:00 in the afternoon, and I sell out by 2:00 in the afternoon. If you want the beer and you want to get it sooner than that, great. But I don't know what the traffic flow is going to be like yet. So it's, it's a big question mark. I mean, we're lucky in this area too that there's a really good wood fire oven pizza place just down the road, and there's a couple of resorts around here that have great food. So I have a feeling that people will want to come and grab a growler of beer here, go get a pizza, go down to the beach, and have a great time at the beach.
Yeah.
Again, that's in your imagination. You come up with these ideas, but the reality is going to be the reality that happens when we open it, and we don't know what that's going to be yet. So it's all kind of new territory.
But coming back, I mean, you're just talking like you said about the Google Maps and all that, but I mean, I don't know whether it's deliberate or not, but you've obviously put a lot into the branding. You have lots of branded stuff, and your label designs are all there. And so, did it start with the branding and then just become the desire to be a brewery? Or
well, no, I was doing stuff like that because of a lot of the really nice labels are all in tribute to friends of mine who are performers, and I was doing that before I decided to become, take this in a more professional or turn it into a business. I was doing it for the fun of it and having a laugh, because these are my friends. It's like my friend who's an artist can do these great labels. I'm happy to support her. I'm a big fan of the work she does. I always wanted to, not be a patron, but is there some way that we could work together on a project? And this turned out to be a really fun one. And then we established certain sort of visual identity things for the brand, which have sort of translated. I've been able to take some of the stuff that we established and do labels that I can do on my own, which is really useful. But then I always look at hers and go, yeah, yours are great. I'd started to do all that branding and all that stuff because that's what I did with my juggling career too. It's like I liked having a look, a feel, an energy to what I was presenting on stage. And then the beer was just like this other extension of, oh, well, this is another fun hobby that might turn into something. And now that it is, it's like, yeah, all that time and energy spent on that branding and everything else has, is only going to benefit me as we move towards opening.
Yeah.
And I actually had a really interesting conversation with a local, they're called Hired Gun Creative, and they do a lot of branding for a lot of breweries in British Columbia. And when we had the conversation, he goes, like, you're so far ahead of just about every other brewery we've ever talked to. You don't need our help. And if you do, it's going to be for two things. It's not going to be for much more than that. And it's like, okay, well, my big question was, for labeling, what am I going to need to do for, official labeling to meet standards for what's, what the government demands that you have on your product labels. And he goes, well, if you're only going to do growler fills and tasting flights, you don't even have to worry about that. It would only be for packaged product. And it doesn't sound like you're going to be doing a lot of that. So let's have that conversation when it comes up. But in the meantime, just keep moving forward with what you're doing and get your brewery open and start making the beer and start, growing a following on an organic basis. So again, I'm not opening in the heart of Victoria or in the heart of Vancouver or in the heart of any big city. I'm opening in the middle of nowhere. And this really is a destination. You have to want to come here, or you're not going to be showing up. And maybe the word gets out. Maybe it becomes popular. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe speaking to other breweries that are here locally, there's another guy who basically opened in a sort of a similar situation to me, except he went for a 7-barrel system, which is 820 liters. So almost 3 times the size of mine. He does a lot of packaging, so he does all his product goes into cans, and they do growler fills from the tasting room as well. But he will have a day in the middle of February where he'll make $100 for the entire day. And it's almost not worth opening, because by the time you've paid staff for being there for 5 hours and whatever else, then you're almost losing money by being open. So it's, maybe you just dial your hours back. So there's a meadery just down the road from us as well that makes honey mead, and they're open Saturday, Sunday in the winter, and they take January off. They just close completely because it's not worth staying open. And I envision the same kind of thing here. It's like, we'll open when it makes sense to open, and if it doesn't, then I'll take some time off and I'll go off and do some cruise ship jobs and still maintain my performing career a little bit, because if I can do both, great. And if you're a lot of breweries in the wintertime will do their lagers and their longer ferment beers, things that take longer because they have time, because they're not trying to turn the tanks over as quickly as possible to meet demand. So I have I'm tossing the idea around. We'll see if it works or not, but opening annually on April Fool's Day and closing on Halloween. So October 31st, or we're having limited winter hours and changing things around a little bit. So maybe, regular hours, summer hours, and then winter hours, or maybe just weekends only. So you're not having to chase, you're not opening on Tuesday to chase money that it's not even worth, it's not worth turning the lights on at that point. It's like, there's no point. You're spending more than you're making. And for the 3 people that show up, if you actually tell people that you're only going to be open on Saturday or Sunday or one of the days, they'll make a point of coming. Like, if they want your beer, they'll make a point. And instead of trying to be dictated by what the consumer tells you they want, if you tell them what you are doing, they'll adjust their schedule accordingly. So again, going back to lifestyle, it's like, do I want to be open 7 days a week from 10 in the morning till 10 at night? No, I want to be open. I want to be closed on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, so I can be in the brewery making beer, staying focused on the task without having distractions of consumers and people around, patrons around. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, be open from noon till 6 and still have a life. So take my dogs for a walk in the morning, enjoy breakfast with my wife. We'll get over to the brewery, be there for 6 hours, really comfortable amount of time. So I don't, and again, lifestyle. I don't want to have to be working too hard. And if you tell people that you're only going to be open from those hours and they don't show up on time, sorry. I mean, that's on you. It's not.
It does. I mean, scarcity, the whole thing of scarcity is a big, it's a big driver for people, really.
Well, hopefully. Again, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it'll be or not. There's another brewery on the Vancouver Island that is run by a really nice guy, a good friend, who has a 100-liter system. So he's a third the size of what I'm moving for. And he has Wednesday and Saturdays are the only days he's open for people to come in. The tasting room was open, people go. And during the pandemic, he was closed. He was only doing off sales from Saturday from noon till 5. And he was doing as much business noon to 5 as he was doing like pre-pandemic. I mean, he'd been open for 3 or 4 years before the pandemic hit. So he had a following already, but people were coming and buying 2 or 3 cases of beer from him at a time. And so he would sell out in his Saturdays and make as much money as he would if he'd been open 2 days a week or 4 days a week or 5 days a week. So again, it goes, if you set your hours very, very specifically and people know that those are what your hours are, and again, like if instead of growing my production, I'll just shorten my hours. And instead of, selling 100 liters of beer 4 days a week, I'll sell it 2 days a week. Like I'll sell the same amount of beer, but I'll do it in fewer number of days, hopefully. I mean, that's the dream. That's the thinking. Whether that's going to become the reality or not becomes the next question. But we still have to get panels on walls and tanks in position and all the plumbing done and all the electrical hooked up. And
so maybe let's go back to that. So you got your floor in.
Yep, floor's in. Walls are all framed in.
Any problem?
Panels are going to be next. Once the panels are done, we actually moved the tanks out of the space where they are because that's the space where the milling area, the bathroom, and cold storage area are going to be. And so we weren't able to start work on that side of the project with the tanks in it. Now that the tanks are out, I mean, when the panel guy comes in to do the wall panels and the ceiling, we'll pull the tanks out. He'll do the panels. It'll take a day or two for him to do it. And the tanks can just sit on the driveway while we're waiting for it to go in. And then they can get wheeled back in. And while that's happening, we can work on the other side of the project. So the bathroom can go in. We need to break up the concrete floor there to do the plumbing for the bathroom. We need to do some framing for the walls for the cold storage space and the mill area. So there's a bunch of work that still needs to be done on that front. And that will be, I'm guessing, March, April is when that'll get completed. Our license agreement with the government, you get what's called an approval in principle from the provincial government. So we have a bunch of different government agencies that we deal with. The Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, which is basically the liquor board, when you apply for a license to manufacture beer, they tell you, show us your business plan, show us your layout, show us everything that you're planning to do, because we want to look at it and see if it's a viable business. And if it's not, we'll tell you. And they looked at the proposal that I pitched and they said, yes, this looks like it could be viable. And yes, we will give you your approval in principle. So in theory, we approve your plan. Now go and make it happen. And you get a year between when you get your approval in principle until you're officially supposed to open. But we had 9 months of waiting for building permits. So that put us behind the 8 ball. So I wrote and said, hey, we're about to expire. What is December 6th is when we were supposed to be open. We had 9-month wait because it was out of our control. Local government officials weren't doing building permits very quickly, and it just took longer than expected. So what is the scenario? And they go, well, it'll give you an extension, no problem. You are moving in the right direction. It's more to keep an eye on people who say they're going to open a brewery and then don't. It's like they don't want to have an open-ended sort of agreement. They want you to move forward at a regular pace. So at the moment we have our approval in principle extended until June 6th. And I foresee being able to be up and running by that point, hopefully, especially, now that the tanks are sort of getting into position. And once the walls are done in that area, that'll be great. And then the serving area will get done. Like a lot of the building won't take long. It's just waiting on the supply for these panels. It's like 6 weeks longer than we should have been. And I mean, really, had I been more clear with the builder from the get-go, the panels should have probably been in beginning of the year. And here we are, beginning of March. We're 2 months late getting to a process that should have been done 2 months ago. Right. So it's like, my wife is really fond of saying that anything that costs you money but teaches you something, that's just tuition. So I've been spending some money on tuition on things that I'm learning from. But, right. That's, again, part of the adventure. And in the grand scheme of things, an extra few $100s here and there doesn't add up to a whole lot, hopefully. I mean, yeah, you try to be thrifty. You try to be, you don't try to spend money twice if you can get around it. But at the same time, it's like, I didn't know. I had to learn it. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't do it on purpose. I mean, mistake is a mistake because, it's an accident. You didn't do it on purpose. So you just pick up the pieces, keep moving forward.
So what's the minimum you need to get into place now to open and to satisfy the
for the rules and regulations. So I have to get all the tanks hooked up. All the plumbing has to get done so that they can come, the liquor board can come and check to make sure what I said I was going to do is what is actually there. So they check with a flow meter what your volumes are, just to make sure you're producing at the volume you said you were going to be doing, because that's how you get taxed. So the province takes a provincial tax on what you're producing, and the federal government takes a small amount of tax for the federal government. Everybody wants part of your money. So they have to check what your production is. And then you don't actually have to pay your tax until the beer comes out of the fermenters and is into either a keg or a bottle or a can. So they base it on your actual production volume, not like what you actually produce, like what actually goes into the keg, as opposed to what actually might be in the fermenter. So because there's always trub and stuff that is at the bottom of the fermenter that you're not going to get. And if you're doing like a big IPA and there's a ton of hop particulate in there, you're going to get a lot of absorption into your hops. So you may have a 300-liter system, or you may be able to produce, in theory, 300 liters of beer, but by the time you've done all the dry hopping and everything else, you might get 220 liters of beer out of it, or whatever else. I mean, it again depends on the beer, depends what you're making, but that didn't really answer your question. What do we need to do? We need to get everything hooked up. They need to come and check to make sure it satisfies what they're after, and that we did what we said we were going to do. And then I need to register with the liquor distribution branch, which is another part of the provincial government. So once that, they're the ones who take the tax. The manufacturing business and the distribution business are two different things. And even though I'm not distributing, they regulate what gets sold from my property.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So you gotta jump through a few more hoops, and you have to register your beers and get a SKU for them so that they can track whether it's being sold from the keg, or if it's being sold in a can, or if it's being, like, whatever vessel that it goes into has to have a different SKU number on it. So you have to register each of your beers with the government. Then you have to, have all that paperwork done on their website so that it's all sorted out as well. So yeah, there's a lot to it. I mean, it's not for the faint of heart, but.
So sorry, but there's a whole bunch of stuff there that just suddenly hit me, and I don't know if it's just Canada or not, because I don't know enough. But you have to register all your beers. Does that mean every time you decide to brew a new style of beer with different ingredient, you have to go and register it in advance?
Yeah, or you can register it as you're making it, and then they'll give you the SKU hopefully before you go to sell it, because I mean, beers take 2 to 3 weeks usually for turning around. By the time, I mean, if you're forced carbonating, if you're doing bottle conditioning, it takes longer than that. But for a forced carbonated beer, it's like 3-week turnaround is not like, it's 10 days quite often if you do a really quick one. So 10 days to 2-3 weeks, sort of in that time range. While you're doing that, you can be filling in the paperwork on the government website so that then they can issue you with a SKU that allows you to sell that beer. Now, I have one of the IPAs I make, I call it Hop Elimination IPA. And it's really just an excuse to blow out whatever hops I have in the fridge and get rid of everything, so that it's like, okay, I want this, you want to sort of target this IBU range, and you know what the alpha acids are for your different hops. So you just go, I've got a whole lot of Mosaic, and I got a whole ton of Cascade, and I got a whole ton of this. Let's just throw them in to make this Hop Elimination. Now, that Hop Elimination IPA, in theory, should be the same every time you do it, but they're not going to come out and check it. And if that's what you're selling it under, then you can call that beer that thing, even though the recipe might fluctuate a little bit from batch to batch. But for your core beers, if people are coming out to expect a certain flavor profile from, say, the coconut blonde that I make, if they want that beer and it's not the same, they're going to complain. And there may be a little bit of variance from batch to batch, just because, the humidity or whatever in the air that's going to change things, or how old that yeast is, or whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of factors that can contribute to things shifting, sliding a little bit in terms of the flavor profile. But on a 300-liter batch brewery, you're also not probably having customers who are so, particular. Like the nature of what we're doing is that, the the hops are over there. They're going to be a little bit different from year to year. It's more like a winery than it is a commercial brewery where you're trying to hit like your consistent, like, you know, a Stella has to take like a Stella every single time, or people will complain. If Heineken doesn't taste exactly like Heineken's supposed to taste like, they're going to complain. If, you know, and rightfully so. I mean, it's on that level, it's people have an expectation of what that product's going to be. But here it's going to be a little bit more like, well, this time we used a little bit more hops because it didn't seem to, we weren't getting enough kick out of it. And the hops are from right over there. So, you know, last batch was a little bit less hoppy. This one is going to be a little bit more, and there'll be a little bit more variance. So, you know,
just because your hops crop this year is slightly different.
Yeah. Like it's an agricultural crop, and you're not going to get the same consistency from time to time. The other nice fun thing that I just did was set up an account with a maltster on Vancouver Island. So again, the malt is going to be from a farm that's like an hour away from where we are. So again, trying to source as many of the ingredients as locally as possible, so that you really are getting a taste of what Vancouver Island has to offer, and really trying to highlight that as a selling feature for what it is. Like, yeah, if you want to get a Stella, go to get a Stella. If you want to come and try something really interesting and unique, pop out here. You know, we'll have a room for, you know, you and 10 of your friends, and we'll serve you up some juggling tasting flights, and you can take some growlers home with you. It's perfect. You know, it's like, I love it.
Actually, just coming back to that, because that ties in with something you were saying about, you know, limiting hours and that. Like, I think you're going more to have kind of larger groups rather than have one or two people come at a time, and have larger groups like over a weekend rather than 3 people at a time for a whole week.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes more sense. Like, yeah. I think from I don't know if it's good or bad, but when we've had people show up and wanting to have these sort of, you know, pre-opening tastings, I think a lot of the time they think, oh, we're going to show up and we're going to pop in for, you know, half an hour, 45 minutes, and we'll be gone. And inevitably they end up staying for 2 or 3 hours, because we end up having great conversations, telling great stories about all the beers they're trying. And, you know, from a business point of view, that's, you know, shooting yourself in the foot. It's suicide, because you want people to go through the system as quickly as possible if you're trying to make money. But I want to have a good experience. I want to have fun. It's got to be about my fun. I mean, going back to this, our friend Dave Paul, who's got this tiny little 100-liter brewery up in a little bit further up the island. He is one of the happiest brewers I've ever seen. Like, he seems to have it dialed in so well, because he's making beer, which he loves doing. He was a great server before he opened his brewery. Like, he worked at restaurants and stuff for years and years and years. So he's really on point with giving people incredible hosting experience. So he just makes people feel welcome and makes them want to come back. And so that's really, really positive. But again, you're only open 2 days a week. You don't have to panic. And then he has a life. He goes skiing. He goes mountain biking. He does all this other stuff. And he's dialed in his system. So at 100 liters a batch, he's making enough to cover his bills and have a really great life, but is not so wound up with making it bigger, better, stronger, faster, like so many other commercial operations, that it has thrown his life out of whack. It's like, no, he's got a daughter who's going to go to school, and he's, you know, because he's been brewing, he's had a lifestyle where he gets to enjoy his time with his daughter and his wife and the experience that they're having on Vancouver Island. I mean, it seems like a much better scenario than, you know, somebody who's packaging 800 liters of beer more per batch, like 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever liters of beer per batch, and then you have to sell it, and then you have to worry about not only the making of it, but then also the selling of it. Yeah, sure, it's the same amount of work roughly to make 300 liters of beer as it is to make 3,000 liters of beer. I mean, you're really just pushing a bit more liquid around, but you know, you need to boil for 60 to 90 minutes. You need to add your hops at the right time. You need to create this, you know, this formula that works. But if you're making 3,000 liters of beer, you also have to deal with 3,000 liters of beer. You have to store it. You have to get rid of it. You have to distribute it. You've got to package it. And at 300 liters of beer a batch, or even like I could do half batches at 150 liters of beer, which is, you know, only a little bit bigger than what Dave Paul's doing up in Love Shack Libations. It's great amount of, you know, like, and that may be the way I start. I may only start with like 150 liters a batch, because until the demand exists for it, why would I make more than I can sell? And why would I, you know, if I'm going to be putting it in kegs and force carbonating it, like I would rather have that beer turn around at a reasonable pace, because if it's a hoppy beer, those hops flavors and those everything that disappears really quick. So some beers do well with aging, and I'll probably have a select few that are done for cellaring. So people who want to get and they may be available at Christmas time. So, they'll be, again, winter hours, weekends in December, come get some beer if you want to have some for your Christmas parties and stuff like that. And then January, a lot of people take January off from drinking anyway. So it's a good time to, shut down or not completely shut down, but focus on production so that you've got a little bit more volume of stock heading into the spring, which will probably be a bit busier. So yeah, it's just, I'm making it up as I go along, really. And I seem to make beer that people like to drink. You haven't had any yet, but the people who keep showing up, 6 guys came and helped move the equipment, because they believe in this silly thing, this crazy dream that I'm moving towards. And also they like the beer that I drink. So it's like everyone who came got beer to take away. They got paid in beer. Thank you so much. And we moved 9 tanks in 45 minutes with the right number of hands. And with that kind of support, I put the call out 2 or 3 days before we were going to move stuff, and I got yeses from just about everyone I asked. Right. And they showed up at 9 a.m. We got everything done by 10. And then they were sort of standing around going, well, that didn't take very long, did it? And I was like, well, can I get you a beer? And they were like, yes, please. That would be lovely. And I was like, well, a little day drinking on a Sunday morning, I guess, never hurt anybody. But, it's like, okay.
They hadn't even built up a thirst from the sound of it.
We didn't have enough time to get the thirst going, because it really didn't take as long as I thought it would. When the equipment was originally delivered last May, it was on the back of a large truck. And we had a neighbor who has a forklift who came and helped move it from where the truck was up to where it was being stored for the last almost year. And that job took 3 hours. We were able to unload the truck in 3 hours with 3 neighbors, and myself and 3 neighbors. And we got it done really quite quickly, getting it all out of the truck, getting it in and up. So I knew it wasn't going to take an enormous amount of time to get the equipment into position, but it was also this is, one of the guys who came was an engineer, and he had his measuring tape out, and we measured everything perfectly so that it was exactly the way it was on the layout for the floor plan in the original plan. And I'm looking at it going, yeah, I don't think we need that much space back there. We can tuck this in a little bit more, and it'll actually give me more room in the middle of the space as opposed to having things away from the wall. And so, it went together really, really quickly, which is just super exciting. It's super exciting to see that stuff in the space. And then after everybody had hung out for a little while, a couple of the guys were homebrewers as well, and they brought some of the beer that they'd made. And so we all, everybody who had helped, got to try these different beers from these different guys, and it was just fantastic. It was a really fun. Yeah, it's like basically a homebrewers club on steroids. It's just a little bit bigger. And these guys were like, yes, I totally want to come out and brew on this system. And yes, I will contribute. And yes, how can I make this happen? Because you're doing what I want to do. It's just, I'm so risk adverse that I couldn't put myself in a stressful situation that you're putting yourself in. I was like, well, just life's supposed to be an adventure. So I'm just trying to have a good time with it. And yeah, I don't have all the answers, and no, I don't know what I'm doing a lot of the time. And that's where the tuition comes in again. It's like you pay a little bit to learn, and you either pay with your time or you pay with your money, and one or the other. Like if I'd spent, as soon as I started getting interested in beer, if I decided to go from the home brewing sort of scenario into a brewery and start working, I would have had to give up the performing career that I was enjoying so much. So I would have lost something there for the gaining of the experience. But yeah, it's how do you compare? Like, where's your time best spent? Is it spent, dreaming of this and never doing it, or is it spent trying to do it? And I joke with my wife all the time. It's like the worst thing that can happen is that it's not successful. And so what? We tried. And I'm having a lot of fun with the journey. And do I know where it's going to go exactly? No. But how boring would it be if you knew exactly what tomorrow was going to bring every day? It's just more interesting to me to be living a more interesting life. But I know it's not for everybody. And certainly, like a couple of the guys who showed up on the weekend, they were like, I'm so excited to see you doing this, and I would love to do it, but there's no way I want to give up my government job with my pension and everything else. It's like, this just seems like such a huge risk. And I'm like, well, I mean, my whole life has been that way. You know, what's the job security as a juggler? It's like in the grand scheme of things, I think more people are interested in beer than they are in a juggling show. But as long as I can be entertaining doing either, then it should work out one way or another.
Okay. Well, first of all, we have a few people watching here, so if anybody has any comments, just
please
throw them in there before we leave David go, because we'll be finishing up now.
And I got to go brew a beer. I'm going to be making a chocolate cherry pale ale, which will be great.
So you're making, well, it's evening here. I'll be allowed to
go have yourself a pint.
It'll be a different beer, but I'm sure I'll be allowed. But so just before we go, so you're still opening on the 1st of April, but it probably will not be enough fish. It might be the official soft opening, but it won't be.
We're calling it a launch. We're not calling it an opening.
Okay. We'll launch on the 1st of April.
We're gonna launch between 2 and 4 on April 1st, 2023, and then we'll open when the government says we're allowed to open. And in the meantime, we're just going to keep having fun. And if people show up and they want to try to taste something, then they're more than welcome to. But reach out in advance, because I might not be here. I might be on a cruise ship.
And what if can anybody turn up for that launch, or are you?
I mean, it's like if you want to come over, Brian, by all means, like hop in the plane. It's a bit of a commute, but if you want to be here from 2 to 4 on April Fool's Day. And I deliberately kept it to 2 hours because I want to say it open, but I don't want to be open so long that like all of the beer in the house is completely destroyed, like just gone. I need to have a little bit around for myself as well. So I'm actually spending a bunch of time this week brewing up a bunch of beer so that there is a little bit of a bit of a stockpile set up. So when people are showing up, we should have, what did we just did? I bottled a Rogan. I got a Hefeweizen. I did a maple syrup infused Belgian style double or double, depending on how you pronounce a double. Is that how you pronounce it in Belgium?
Double is the Flemish part. I think that's more the accepted pronunciation.
Double. Yeah. Okay, so that's done. I've got what I did a smash beer yesterday that was all Pilsner malt from this local malt store, which I'm super excited about, and sterling hops from the hop yard. Today's the chocolate. It's a chocolate in it's just a tiny bit of chocolate malt in a pale ale, and then a friend gave me a big bag of cherries that is going to be it's going to sit on the fruit for a week after primary fermentation, maybe a little bit of. The end of primary, I'll throw all the cherries in so that they can have a little bit of biochemical reaction with the fruit, which will be good. And then tomorrow I'm going to do a dark mild, and then I've got the red currant beer and the coconut blonde to do before the opening as well. So
you have plenty to be doing.
Yeah, there's a couple things on the go for sure.
All right. Well, listen, thanks again for taking the time. Maybe we'll catch up with you after the launch, sometime.
But before the 6th of June, when I have to open, because that's when the government says I have to open. But yeah, I'm happy to talk, and it'll be interesting. Like I'd love to connect again and just let you know if the plans and the reality are in sync, because that's the big question mark at this point.
Anytime you want to talk, let me know, because it's a fascinating journey. And yeah, we'll definitely try and catch up with you at least once before your opening anyway. And
sure. Can't wait.
Launch is probably unlikely, but maybe between the launch and the opening, we can do it.
Perfect. Sounds great.
Excellent. Okay. Well, listen, I'll just play this out and say thanks again. And looked like nobody had questions. We still have a few viewers there, but everyone's very quiet.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Few people on YouTube. So so that's it. So if you're on YouTube, do subscribe and do all that commenting and subscribing stuff. It helps. And we'll talk to David again in a couple of months, maybe.
Yeah, sounds great.
Perfect. Let me see if I can figure this thing out. And we'll end this if I do it right, which I probably didn't, but let's try it.